Nicolas Cage-athon episode 5! Woo! Okay, I got some grade A slop for you today. Maybe I'm being... Okay, that's a bit mean. Yeah, the choices today are not so good, but we will soldier on. The three movies today we're looking at, The Old Way, Willy's Wonderland, and A Score to Settle. Let's look at The Old Way. First, I'm going to give a brief, succinct opinion of it, and then we'll go into the spoiler section where I can talk more freely. I think you can sum The Old Way up as, Mom, can we watch True Grit? No, honey, we have True Grit at home. The True Grit at home, The Old Way. The Old Way, it tries too hard. It feels like they're trying to put Cage into a role that he wasn't meant to, and frankly, more of like a copycat role. I would not recommend watching this movie unless you're just a hardcore Cage fan. Yeah, I would not recommend this movie to the casual viewer. With that being said, now we're going into the spoiler realm. The Old Way, like I said, tries to be too much like True Grit. Cage's character is an old killer, a gunman, if you will, and he's tamed by a woman and a family. But he still has that dark past that haunts him. In fact, it's that dark past that rears its head again in the form of the son of a guy he killed. Throughout the movie, the writers or director tries to give Cage a very heavy, burdensome feel, where he's a clear-eyed killer, but he's scarred from his life of being a ruthless gunman. But the way they go about doing that is, it's hard to explain, but it makes him just feel like a very quiet, awkward guy. It doesn't make Cage imposing, and I frankly don't think he was the right guy for this role. Furthermore, you'll see that his daughter, she rapidly assumes the same demeanor as the girl in True Grit, which I don't remember her name either. But, she's an emotional rock. She can handle bad things happening to her. And early on in the movie, Cage's wife gets killed by a son of the guy that Cage killed way back in the day. And so the rest of the movie is Cage and his daughter hunting these guys to try to kill them, because there's like a gang of them. The movie just felt a little off. Cage just feels off. The plot just feels a little well-treaded, if that makes sense. It just feels like they took True Grit, changed the homework a little bit, and tried to shoehorn Cage into this. It's not actually terrible. I mean, it's serviceable as a movie, and if you're bored on a Saturday afternoon, there's plenty of other better things to do, but there's worse movies you could watch, for sure. Further critiques, the villains felt a little cartoonish, even though the movie wasn't going for a slightly comedic tone. There was one scene where Cage pulls a gun on his daughter, which felt very out of place and weird. It did not fit in with Cage's character, and just made me raise my eyebrows when I watched the movie. I didn't think that scene was very compelling. Yeah, a couple other things. The music was very melodramatic, very in your face, sometimes just too loud. In some situations, in some scenes, it felt like the director was not completely sure if they were selling the emotion that they wanted you to feel, so they just decided to pipe in more dramatic music and make it louder, and hopefully that would convince the viewer that what they were watching meant something. So I didn't like that. Another minor critique, as they're chasing the gang, Cage begins to teach his daughter how to shoot, how to survive in the wilderness, and she just gets competent way too quickly for being a young child. She's like 7 or something, and very quickly begins to shoot very accurately and can ride a horse great, and I don't know, that seemed a little unbelievable, but what do I know? Overall, I felt like they were copying the homework of True Grit. I would not recommend this unless you just love True Grit and you'd love to see Cage in a similar movie, but would not recommend. Okay, now time to rank the movie. This wasn't offensively bad. It was certainly better than Industrial Symphony No. 1, The Dream of the Brokenhearted. That movie is terrible. It was better than Kill Chain. Does it beat The Runner? The ending of The Old Way was rather disappointing. It was pretty lackluster, and it actually wound up with Cage dying before killing the final bad guy. It's his daughter who picked up the gun and shot him. So yeah, the ending was disappointing. Didn't even get a cool shootout at the end. So The Runner at least had a more cohesive story that gave more room within the plot for Cage to showcase his ability. I think another thing that hurts The Old Way is it was just too melodramatic and it felt forced. The Runner did not feel forced. It felt relatively comfortable with what it was. I'm going to put The Old Way here. Next up, Willy's Wonderland. This movie was very disappointing, but it still had a few crumbs of goodness. A few tasty crumbs, if you will. Willy's Wonderland is an unabashed ripoff of the Five Nights at Freddy's concept. I don't think I have to explain it. My overall thoughts before we get into spoilers is that this movie is terrible, but it does have a few tasty morsels of violence involving animatronics and Nicolas Cage. I would not recommend this movie unless you're a big Cage fan or you're a big Five Nights at Freddy's fan and you just can't get enough of either of those two concepts. But for a casual viewer, again, I don't think I'd recommend this. But if you like movies that are so bad they're good, this actually might be something that is worth watching. But as far as a piece of cinematic arts, that it is not. Let's get into the spoilers. So Cage is driving. He winds up getting some flat tires. He barters with the local fella. Gets him to be a janitor for his Willy's Wonderland business overnight, and then in the morning he'll have the tires changed. So Cage goes in there and he starts cleaning up the place that night. And the businessman, he locks the door so Cage can't get out. Another fun fact is Cage has these energy drinks throughout the entire movie that he keeps chugging. But while Cage is working, you have these brat, like teenagers, young adults who want to burn down Willy's Wonderland because of the damage it's caused. But then they don't want to burn it down because Cage is in there. They want to try to get him out, but Cage doesn't want to get out. And so then they wind up falling and accidentally entering Willy's Wonderland. And then a lot of them start to get killed one by one by the creatures. The acting is atrocious. Everyone's way overacting, and not the good kind that Cage does, the bad kind that a bad actor does. There's exaggerated facial expressions. There's very unconvincing line delivery by the people. In fact, the main girl, who is sort of like the main character out of the brat group, she is insufferable. Did not like her performance whatsoever. Did not convincingly act in any way. Like, everyone was terrible in this movie. So they wind up almost all getting killed off, but Cage, one by one, takes down these animatronic characters. And those are the nuggets of goodness, the tasty morsels, if you will, of this movie. Even though the fight scenes are sort of bad, like they're not choreographed super well, and you can tell it's a low-budget movie and the camera's slinging around, it's still kind of fun. It's fun to see Cage fight a big gorilla. It's fun to see him beat up on a weird toad-looking thing. It's just kind of fun to see some Cage violence against animatronics, and there's like oil and blood slinging all over the place. It's got a schlock to it that can be entertaining to the right audience. But yeah, eventually the police get involved, and then we get a whole bunch of terrible, unneeded exposition that explains why the building is there and why the animatronics do like they do. And apparently it was because there were these murderers that murdered people, and then they did some type of satanic ritual that moved their spirits into the robots, and then the robots were too deadly. So the town started making sacrifices to the robots so that they would stay inside of Willy's Wonderland instead of wandering the place. And it was just a bunch of gobbledygook that didn't add to the experience. It was unneeded, and it just was ridiculous. Someone who's going to watch a Freddy Fazbear ripoff movie is not there for a compelling plot or a compelling explanation of why the robots do what they do. We're there to see some animatronic violence, some death, to see a guy fight some robots, dodge, weave, make it out alive. We're not there to learn about why the satanic ritual made the robots alive and received the spirit of a bad dude who was killing people with a beanie hat on. Waste of time. Terrible. Cage winds up killing all the animatronics. He exits Willy's Wonderland at the end of the night, gets his Camaro back with new tires. The last robot winds up blowing up the car that the businessman is in and the mechanic in a really weird CGI sequence that was laughably bad. And then Cage somehow gets the girl that I was talking about before that had terrible line delivery, the main character, so to speak, of the Brats. She gets in the car with Cage. So I guess she's 18, and then they drive off into the sunset? I don't know. Fun fact about this movie, Cage does not speak a single word. He's entirely silent. And yet, ironically, this movie has way too much exposition in it. Way too much explaining things that don't need to be explained. Final thoughts, was this movie great? No. Is it worth watching? For most people, no. But if you like making fun of bad movies and you want to see some more Cage violence, maybe you'll enjoy it. Maybe it'll be worth watching, but it's a lot of slog to watch just for a couple of morsels. So I personally would not watch it again. So let's rank it. As much as I have ragged on it and making fun of it as I've done, it's still not the worst movie I've ever seen. I think I'm going to rank this above The Cotton Club and below Bangkok Dangerous. And the reason I'm putting it there is because the trash of this movie weighs it down to keep it below Bangkok Dangerous. But it has enough Cage action in it and enough fun little snippets that makes it go above The Cotton Club. Because as you remember, The Cotton Club did not have Cage as a main protagonist. He was more of a side character. So we didn't get to see him a lot. And I think there's more interesting Cage content in Willy's Wonderland than there is in The Cotton Club. And now on to our third and final movie for this episode. We have A Score to Settle. Big thoughts before we go into spoilers. This movie is about a gangster who goes to jail for many years, and when he gets out, he wants to get revenge on the people who sold him down the river, while also trying to make peace with his son that he's, been absent from his life for so many years. But this movie fails to either be an action thriller of him chasing down the gang members, and it also fails at trying to be like a sentimental redemption story of his relationship with his son. So without being any of those, it kind of flounders around. But it does have a lot of scenes of Cage driving a C7 Corvette, so it's got that going for it. Would I recommend this movie? No, it's not a good movie. It doesn't have any particular redeeming qualities, so I would skip this if you're the casual watcher. On to spoilers. This movie was pretty lackluster. I think Cage showed a decent range in this movie. He was able to really sell his emotions towards his son. One of his strong points was some of his scenes with his son where he's trying to reform a bond, reform a relationship with his son and nurture that back to health. It didn't really follow through. It didn't have a good payoff at the end, but some of those scenes did work. Like I said, Cage gets out of jail and he wants to start hunting down the gang members who sold him out on the river. And he's got a lot of money that he's hidden away that he starts using. And he gets, like a nice hotel, and he buys a C7 Corvette, and he starts to sort of repair the relationship with his son. But as he hunts down these gang members, his son doesn't approve of that, and that hurts their relationship, sort of forms a rift in it. Add on to this situation that Cage is trying to navigate, he then meets a girl who's actually an escort, and that sort of complicates his feelings, because he feels like there's more there than there is. The reason the movie flounders is I don't think it really fully seizes upon each of those concepts. The relationship with the son, the hunting down of the gang members, the re-exploration of romance in his old age. It doesn't quite fully develop or capitalize on any of those threads. The relationship with his son, yes, there's some good acting there in him trying to repair the relationship, but there's not more nuance or more depth to that. It stays relatively surface level of their feelings towards each other and the son's critique of the dad and the dad's navigation of that. There's not a more in-depth exploration of human relationships or of human nature in that. Jumping to the hunting down of the gang members, that's not fully capitalized upon. There's not interesting thriller moments of Cage, chasing loose threads to find each of his old gang members. There's not cool shootouts for each one. There's not creative deaths or intrigue or really any twists to it. He tends to just show up, have a scuffle, and then kill a gang member, or sometimes a gang member will give up. In fact, there's not that many gang members that he hunts down. And then furthermore, the twists in that storyline, the twists don't really have a payoff. The boss that sold Cage down the river, Cage thought he was dead. Turns out he's alive, but he's been in a coma for years due to a stroke. And when Cage finally finds him in a assisted living home or hospital, whatever, there's not an emotional. Cage doesn't kill him, but then there's not an emotional confrontation that Cage has with some aspect of his former self that wanted revenge. There wasn't a payoff for that element of the story. Furthermore, a gang member who Cage did not want to kill, who Cage thought was on his side, turns out to have been instrumental in selling Cage down the river, and that did not really have a payoff. Cage shoots him in the knee and then walks away to try to forgive, but then the fella's daughter shoots Cage in the back, almost doesn't kill him, but then Cage walks out and gets shot by police for no good reason. On that thread, the movie fails because it doesn't fully commit and have a revenge story or a crime story or a thriller story. It eases off the gas on that, but then it doesn't commit to an emotional character study type of storyline with that easing off of the gas. It's like they eased off on that storyline for no good reason. The story of Cage with this escort, that doesn't go anywhere. It just kind of fizzles out. It's not developed in a compelling way. Furthermore, this movie kind of goes off on tangents sometimes. There's one or two scenes with a pimp who handles the escorts, and the pimp gets mad at Cage, and then Cage beats him up, but that doesn't really progress or contribute to any of the three main story ideas. Overall, this movie felt like it didn't really know what it wanted to be, and so it just floundered and flipped and flopped and did not pay off. Combined with that, at the very end when Cage gets shot by all the police and he's fading out of consciousness, and his son's spirit is talking to him because his son had died, and Cage is talking about wanting to be forgiven, and there's angelic opera music playing as he's bleeding out on the steps of the church. The movie just was confused itself, and that showed. It did not have any particular redeeming scenes with Cage. Sure, there's some action. Sure, there's some back and forth arguments or dialogue. But nothing really that saved the movie. Cage had a couple of endearing aw shucks type of routines with the girl, but nothing that elevated the movie above the lackluster, just bland story that it was. So this movie was boring, was confused, and did not have any nuggets that made it really worth watching. So let's rank it. Actually, I'm going to rank it above Kill Chain, but below The Old Way. And I say that because The Old Way was more coherent and committed to its attempt at telling a story, even though it didn't fare a whole lot better. Having said that, A Score to Settle certainly beats Kill Chain, because like I said, Kill Chain was cartoonishly bad. It was not a fun watch. And so wrapping up, these three movies were not that great. Really bringing up the rear in the movies that we've seen so far. What's your thoughts on these three? I couldn't have said it better myself. This is episode 5 of the Nicolas Cage-athon. Like, comment, and subscribe down below. Let me know what you think of mine and his assessment of these movies. And we'll see you in the next video here on the Raw Egg Slim channel.